Hey everyone, Versha Sharma, senior correspondent from NowThis here. If you've been watching all week, you might have seen some of our interviews with speakers from the DNC. We've got our final one today to help us wrap up this week. It's former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who's going to be joining us very shortly. But thank you so much for tuning in all week. We've appreciated your comments, your questions. We've talked to several senators. We talked to Senator Cory Booker, as well as businessman, former presidential candidate Andrew Yang yesterday. And it's been a really interesting week. I want to know in the comments if you've been watching, and if you haven't, you can see everything on the NowThis YouTube, as well as highlights on our Instagram. So let's bring in our guest for today, who's going to help us recap what happened. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday afternoon. Hi, Mayor.
Hello.
Former Mayor. How are you?
I'm good. It's been quite a week. I feel good about it all, and nice to be going into the weekend.
It has been. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on a Friday afternoon going into the weekend. You were one of the speakers last night, so tell us, maybe for those who are watching who missed it, what you talked about and kind of what you took away from the final night of the DNC.
Yeah, I was coming from a pretty personal place. I've been thinking a lot through the time I was running for president and since about the question of belonging. I think our country's in a crisis of belonging. And what makes America unique is the promise of a place where everyone can belong, but we've seen how people have been excluded from that. And so I wanted to share a view about that, as well as try to get across why I'm not just against Donald Trump. What we're up against ought to be motivation enough for so many of us, but also why I'm for Joe Biden and for Kamala Harris, why I'm excited about what their leadership is going to represent. I'm excited about just having some basic compassion and empathy in the White House. And I would say that compassion and empathy is what came across so much last night. I mean, from the big name political leaders who were there to that 11-year-old Braden, who it's just classic Joe Biden that he would pull that kid aside, see himself in this young man with a stutter, and for that 11-year-old to speak to millions of people, it was just really moving. And to me, it captures what leadership is supposed to be, which is finding people and drawing out what's best in them, or motivating them to do more. And so, I hope that people last night through the week got a sense of, again, not just what we're against, which should be abundantly clear by now, but what we think the presidency ought to be about. And I've seen him speak a lot of times over the years. I've never seen Joe Biden speak as effectively as he did last night. So it was really great to see that too.
You also got a little personal in your speech. You talked about your own marriage and how, 10 years ago, it wasn't exactly legal in a lot of states in the US. And you talked about how Joe Biden actually helped push the Democratic Party along. So again, for some of our viewers who may not know that story, I'd love for you to recap that.
Yeah, we forget how swift progress has been. And so we also forget that Joe Biden was actually ahead of the Democratic Party itself. He was considered kind of dangerously out front when he said, look, like marriage equality, it ought to be equal. It was during his time as vice president, nobody that senior had ever said that. And it made a huge difference, I think, in pushing toward making it possible for marriage equality to become the law of the land. It's part of why I think politics is a question of the personal. It's different for all of us how it's personal, but part of how it's personal for me is my marriage, and the most important thing in my life, exists because of decisions that were made in Washington, and decisions that were made by people with political courage. And part of that was Joe Biden's political courage in stepping forward. Again, it's easy to say now. It wasn't so easy when he was stepping forward. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, and that people know about that.
Another big story that we've been following this week is vote by mail and Trump's attacks on the Postal Service. We saw the Postmaster General actually testified before a Senate committee today, and it didn't go well. He said he's not going to reinstate some of the sorting machines that he's already shut down, and people are really worried about whether or not their ballots are going to get in on time in November. So what's your advice to people, and what have you thought of this whole scandal?
Yeah, it's so disturbing. I mean, think of it, just zoom out and think about what makes a country effective, or how you would consider a country to be developed around the world or in our own history. In the 19th century, when you were sizing up the progress of the United States of America, you'd be looking at really basic things. How's the country doing at handling disease? And how's the country doing at delivering mail? It's one of the fundamental things that a country ought to be able to do. And the Postal Service is not a business. It's not supposed to make money. And the simple reality is that the president confessed to his motivations. The president said out loud on television that part of what motivates him to attack the Postal Service is he doesn't want everybody to be able to vote by mail. Voting by mail is how he voted. It's how Mike Pence voted. It's how I voted when I was in the military. And it's a safe way for millions of Americans to vote, especially in the context of the pandemic. And the president's made it very clear that's one of the reasons he's undercutting the Postal Service. We've seen machines that have been ripped out of postal facilities and left out in the rain. We're talking multi-million dollars. It's not like you can just bring them back in and plug them in and turn them back on. We've seen so many actions and steps to make it harder for something so fundamental and so important. Now, I think you can also tell America's not having it, which is why even Republicans are starting to express concern. But it would be a lot more convincing to hear these reassurances from people like the Postmaster General testifying today if it weren't for the fact that the president had, again, openly confessed. It didn't have the tone of voice of a confession, but it was a confession. He admitted why he's motivated to do this.
We actually saw just one of the comments come up, and this is one of the questions I was going to ask you anyway, so it's good. There was a Politico report that was talking about what a Biden cabinet might look like if he wins. And one of the lines said that your name has come up in connection with possible UN ambassador or secretary of the VA, given your military experience. So it might be getting a little ahead of things, but what is your response to that and people who want to see you in the cabinet?
Well, look, I would love to return to public service. It's the most fulfilling thing in my life, and I care a lot about those issues. But I don't want to get ahead of myself because, first of all, I'm going to be an enthusiastic supporter of the Biden-Harris administration, whether I'm returning to government or not. And secondly, we got to make sure there is a Biden administration. Look, I know the numbers look good, like we're winning. As a matter of fact, we're winning big. But that is, first of all, you can't always take polls to the bank. Secondly, there's a long way to go in political time between now and Election Day. And third, we know the headwinds we're going to face in terms of just the mechanics of the elections themselves because of things like voter suppression. So we've got to keep our eye on the ball, make sure that we defeat Donald Trump, elect Joe Biden, and then we can start talking about the other stuff. So
you're not partial to any specific role right now?
I mean, the idea of electing a president is to have somebody in charge of making that kind of decision. So hopefully we will have President Biden in office, and then he can decide what makes the most sense for the country.
Now I saw the RNC is coming up next week, Monday through Thursday as well. And I saw that the DNC or the Democrats just announced that there's going to be some counter-programming, and I believe you're going to be part of that. So can you tell us what that's about?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to an opportunity to call out in real time where they are trying to mislead the American people. I mean, think back to 4 years ago when I was at the convention in Philly, the Democratic convention. And the thing that was really amazing was when you looked around, you saw America. I mean, it was this multiracial, multi-generational coalition, people of every level of age, disability, you name it, everybody was there. And you looked at the RNC and it was just this festival of darkness. I don't know exactly what's ahead next week, but I know that Americans won't hear the truth. And so it's very important to put forward the truth that I think will resonate with people, but needs sometimes to be pointed out. And again, let people see that contrast, because what I saw these last 4 days was just a picture of a better America and what this country could be like.
Is that going to be live during the RNC, or where can people tune in to watch that?
So stand by for more. If you look at my Twitter feed or social media from me or the Democratic Party, you'll see more about how we're going to get our message out. But you can definitely count on us being in a lot of places in a lot of ways to make sure that people hear what we have to say. Speaking
of the 2016 RNC, I was there as well at both conventions, actually. And I think people forget the very different tones and moods that was there on the ground. And one of the contrasts that we saw last night, you were in this candidate video with all of the former candidates who ran against Biden, kind of talking about your experiences and what you thought of him. And I flashed back to the 2016 RNC where Ted Cruz was literally booed off the stage by the audience because that was how aggressive Trump supporters were to his primary challengers. So, I mean, tell me about how you came together with the other candidates to kind of give this coherent message.
Yeah, I mean, our party is unified. Don't get me wrong. Like, we got a lot of real and meaningful differences on exactly how to do these things, and that's fine. That's healthy. We should have a tug of war over how to make sure we get universal health care in this country. We should have a tug of war over exactly who's got the best ideas to make sure that by 2050 we're a carbon neutral society, and by next year we're taking big, bold steps to deal with climate change. But what's going to be decided in November is not how to do these things. It's whether to do these things. And that's where we are unified. And it was impressive. I mean, you saw, from Bernie Sanders to people like John Kasich, who still consider themselves Republicans, and everyone in between saying, we've got to defeat Donald Trump. We've got to elect Joe Biden. So, we're always going to be a big tent. That's a good thing. But you're also going to see that we are united in our mission to move America forward. And I think it's been great to see that unified, because we've got a country that needs to be unified. It was great to kind of demonstrate that in advance by the way our party is getting unified.
Somebody just asked in the comments if you've talked to Amy yet, and that makes me laugh because we did a IG Live interview with Senator Klobuchar earlier this week, and she specifically said, Pete and I have been getting along, which is different than what we saw in the primary.
No, I mean, look, we were obviously, we had our dust-ups on the stage because we were in the heat of competition, and she's a brilliant and competitive political leader. And of course, there were going to be moments where we were going at it, but she's also a fellow Midwesterner. She's somebody that I enjoy catching up with and talking with, and somebody who's continuing to do really good work in the Senate. So it's true. Look, the press will always play up the edges, and there were some real moments of competition, but all of that is just vanishingly unimportant compared to what's on our plate right now as a party and as a country.
And one of the other primary opponents as well was Senator Kamala Harris, who Joe Biden has picked as his running mate. So what are your thoughts on her choice?
I think it was a great choice. I have so much respect for her. Sometimes you come to know and appreciate and respect somebody when you're competing with them. And that's definitely part of why I admire her so much. Somebody who, her very story, or her life story, exemplifies how America can grow to be more inclusive. To have the first Black woman as vice president will be an extraordinary step forward. But it's not just her profile, it's her capacity that I think is going to be so impressive. And it's going to make her a great vice president, but it's going to make her a great running mate too. You just line up, just picture this debate for 1 minute. We're going to have Mike Pence on one side. Mike Pence tying himself into who knows what kind of pretzels, trying to explain why an evangelical Christian thinks a president who got caught sending hush money to a porn star ought to be the moral leader of the United States of America. And then you're going to have someone like Kamala Harris, who has demonstrated in those Senate committee hearings and throughout her career that she knows how to not let somebody off the hook when they're not telling the truth. I'm looking forward to that moment because I think it'll be a moment of clarity for the American people.
I think a lot of people are going to be looking forward to that debate. And Senator Harris kind of hinted at it. Well, she outright said it in her speech on Wednesday night when she said, with her prosecutor background, she said, I know a predator when I see one. So I think that's going to come out more as they continue to be on the campaign trail together. So part of your background is that you've won Democratic races in Indiana, which is not traditionally a Democratic or a blue state. My sister is watching right now. She's a frontline healthcare worker in Louisiana. And I know one thing she wants to know is for people in these deep red states who feel like their votes don't matter because of the Electoral College, what would you tell them about where they should focus their energy or how they should get involved this fall?
Yeah, I know the feeling. And by the way, I campaigned on eliminating the Electoral College, and I think we've got to do that in our lifetimes. Otherwise, we can't really say this is a democratic country. But in the meantime, it's really important for us to compete and fight everywhere. It doesn't get more conservative than Indiana. And yet here in Indiana, actually, in 2008, I saw Barack Obama get this state to vote blue for the first time in 40 years. It can be done, and we're seeing places around the country where races are surprisingly competitive. I'm keeping a close eye on North Carolina, which has generally been conservative, but I think could tip our way this time around. Actually, in Louisiana, you've got my fellow mayor, Adrian Perkins, veteran, brilliant mayor, and somebody who I think also represents a new generation of Black leaders who will make a mark on the country for our whole lifetime, up for that U.S. Senate seat, quite competitive. I know sometimes you feel like you're the only Democrat in the room or the only progressive around in some of these conservative communities, but it's very important for you to stand up and be who you are, because that's what gives a couple others courage to realize after they were feeling the same way that actually they're not alone. And, you know, it's also important that we campaign in every part of the country because so many things are shifting. Look, there are a lot of people who were conservatives either because they just grew up that way, and now they're saying, wait a minute, like this is not this has nothing to do with the values I grew up with. People are conservatives because they believe in national security, which this president has completely failed at. Believe in fiscal discipline, which this is just a joke in today's GOP. Because they believe, they're people of faith who believe in a certain kind of decency that is not represented. So my point is we have a historical opportunity to actually speak to those who have maybe generally voted the other way and invite them. But we got to make sure they feel like they belong on our side of the aisle. I'm not saying we ever water down our values. I'm saying let's do that outreach because we can grow our movement and grow our party at a time like this.
Now, you represent a new, younger wing of the Democratic Party and Democratic leaders, being a millennial mayor. One thing that we saw in the primary is that the youth turnout wasn't as high as some of the candidates wanted it to be. So what can Democrats do, or what would you tell young voters about why they should get more engaged this fall than they were, 6 months ago?
So my message is simple. The longer you're planning to be here, the more you have at stake in this election. It has never been more important. And my generation, the generation coming up after mine, the rest of our lives are going to be defined by whether we succeed or blow it on climate change. We get to be the generation, or at least we could be the generation, that finally brings an end to systemic racism in this country. The economy that we are emerging into will either continue to be tilted toward a vanishingly tiny top 1%, or we can do something about it. And this is your moment of maximum power on election day. And if young people vote, if enough young people vote, that'll be the difference. That'll change everything. But it starts here, and the choice is now. And there are a lot of people in a position of, who are not in a position of privilege, whose lives depend on the decision that we're about to make. So if you feel like maybe I'll vote, maybe I won't, think about the luxury of not feeling like your life is on the line, because lives are on the line.
Thank you so much for your message to our young audience, your young voters, and your time on this Friday. I'm going to end on a little pop culture Friday question, again, because I've seen this in the comments, with my Captain America shield in the background, which is something Senator Cory Booker brought up yesterday as well. Do you have a favorite Avenger? Which Avenger would you be?
Oh, so my favorite overall superhero is Spider-Man. I can just relate to the kind of nerdy young guy, winds up with some powers placed in his hand, trying to figure out who he is. That's my guy.
That's great. I love it. Great answer. Thank you so much for your time.
Same here. Great to be with you.